Hello and welcome to part 4 of our UI Kit series. Now in this video we'll be having a look at the documentation of the project and how to basically form a design system around that to be a bit more opinionated and say, no, this is how we want this component to look and this is how it will function. That is something that you can integrate into a UI kit. If you have a look at the World Food Programme UI kit that we've been looking at throughout this project, you can see that they've got a section here for getting started, so a collection of documents for the intro, and it's similar to a normal website. It's like a hero page, it's got animations, buttons, your call to actions here. So we go down, it's essentially telling you what the UI kit is, its purpose, its toolkit, and it gives you a good rundown of how they want it to be used, the reason behind it, and even asking for feedback. So this is a living, breathing website in a sense that it is constantly being updated, it is being monitored for feedback, and it's quite a core component of their main app, as it should be. As we look through the documents, they've got how to install it, whether you want to use it as an app, just download it, clone it, or use it as a dependency, so install it into your current app and then call it through this by installing the node module WFP/UI or the icons. Seems like they've got a separate section entirely for the icons, like a micro dependency just for the icons if you don't want the UI. So it just probably makes it smaller. That could be an option as well. And then there's SAS as well, and there's styling. Instructions on how to install, instructions about what the project is, using it, recommendations, browser support, even an update section, which can be really handy. And depending on the size of your team or how many people you've got dedicated to the icon kit, can be a bit cumbersome and it can be a lot to manage. But it is also a good thing to let people know this has changed. In this version of the UI kit, this has happened. And it gives people an idea of, okay, so we can trace back when these changes have happened. And it can be pretty good for stakeholders and people just to realize, other developers to know what's happened. So yeah, so we've got this documentation section for getting started, and we've got a specific, it says documentation, but I would say it's more guidelines, because they go into detail about the colors. Obviously we're using primary and secondary colors and different types of colors in our project, but this goes into what's good to use, where to use it, where not to use it, context for it, how it looks, examples. It goes into a lot of detail, and at this point this UI kit becomes a design system because they're being very opinionated as to how the components and the colors and all the elements of it should be used and how they expect it to be used. And it gives developers and designers a good idea of how to use the components. I would say if you are a designer that this is something I would push to have in your company. So from a designer point of view, like, this is super handy as well to have this in your projects, to know that, oh, okay, this is exactly, these are the components and the building blocks that I'll be using to build designs for the developers. So yeah, even going into the logo, so a lot of good stuff, and obviously the components as well, which are just as important. But even the component section goes into a lot of detail. It's very opinionated. It's not just showing the component itself. So what that shows you is that this UI kit is very much a design system, and that's exactly what we're going to do now as well. So if we go to our storybook, we can see that we've got several components, but they're not really organized, and we don't have any documentation. The first thing you see when you come onto this storybook is the button component, and that's not very helpful to the user, someone who might not be particularly working on the UI kit. So if this ever gets hosted, or if someone ever goes onto this just to have a look at what components the project has, they're going to be lost because they're just looking at the button component, and they're going to have to use the search features or something like that. So what we can do to get around this is we can build some documentation. So we're going to build an intro section. So let's go ahead and do that. So within the source folder, let's make sure we have a documentation folder, and this will just be to hold all our documentation components. Let's add our stories. So let's add intro.stories.tsx, and we'll just grab a story from somewhere else. So let's go to the button component. Now, because the documentation is just basically going to be stories, we don't need to add a separate stories folder, and we'll just leave it as that. We can get rid of this. We should add a documentation style sheet. So let's add that now. Documentation.sass. Let's go add it as a module, and we can change this to intro for now. We can delete this. So we'll add a React fragment, and within it we'll just put some test text. So we'll put intro for now, and then we'll replace this with content in just a moment. So let's change that to intro. Let's change that to default, I guess. Right, let's go check this out. So if we now open up Storybook again and refresh that, we can see that we're taken to icon first, and we can see the icons, and in the list we have our intro. Now, the intro's no good if it's obviously coming at the bottom of the list and icons coming first, or buttons coming first, or some random components coming first. We definitely want the intro to be first. So we need to make sure that that is the default story that pops up. So let's go sort that out now. Let's make sure that intro pops up first. So amending the order of your stories can be a bit tricky in Storybook, especially in version 5.0. In version 6, it does become a lot easier. You can simply add some parameters and just sort the order, and it's done there and then. But in version 5, which is what we're using right now, we have to do a little bit more. So if we go to our config.ts, we can see that we've got a function here for loading the stories. It's looking for the .stories prefix, and it's looking for TSX files basically, and it's looking within the source folder. So it's creating our stories from this. But we do want to add one more thing. So we want to add some parameters to say that we want to show the roots, and we want to sort the order through this story sort function, which we'll create in a moment. It'll be a module actually, and this will be the order in which we do it. You can see here it says getting started. We need to make a getting started section similar to the World Food Programme UI Kit, and then we need to have the intro section within that show first. In the component section, we want that to be a separate section that holds all our components together, and then have the button section show up. Now you can see there's a red squiggly line here, and the reason is we haven't actually created this story sort function or this module, and we'll do that right now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new file, and we want to call it storybook sort.ts, and within here we're just going to place some logic that will help sort this out. So what this does is it sorts the stories out for you. Now there's a lot of logic here. This was actually cooked up by somebody called Hanalim on Stack Overflow, and basically he came across the same problem that we have, and it at the time in Storybook version 5 it hadn't really been solved. It is solved in version 6, this problem, but he had come around with this fix. So if you get a chance, go visit this. I'll put the link in the description. I'll obviously put the code in the GitHub repo with a link to that GitHub repo for you to check out. But he goes into why he built it, and there's a whole thread about the reason for it and why it's an issue at the time. Obviously it's not an issue anymore, so definitely worth go checking that out. But this is the logic that we want, and this will help us sort our stories a lot better. So now if we go back to config, and we just make sure that we import storybook sort into this here, and that should basically make that work now. Let's go back to intro, and because we're no longer just using root stories as groups, just like for the component, we're going to need to add some bigger sections. So for this section, for the intro, we want to have a getting started section, and we want to have it as documentation. Now we don't need it to say intro here, we can have it say intro down here. And if we save that, and then we go to the components, and we just amend our component stories as well. So if we go here and we just put components /button, change that to default, and then we go to icon, do the same here. So we put components /icon default, and then if we go to the last one, installation success, we will probably get rid of this at some point, but it's just to show as an example. And then if we go to Storybook and we refresh the page, you can see now we have separate sections. Obviously we've made a spelling mistake in the last one, so we'll go and correct that. But we now have our getting started documentation section, and we have our components. We could actually just get rid of the documentation part, make sure that that's components. Let's go to intro. It looks like we'll probably need it to keep it nested like this and to keep it as a separate group, but at least we've corrected installation success. Right, so I see the emojis. That doesn't matter, we'll be getting rid of this anyway. Remember in the last video we actually added something that we probably shouldn't have. I think it was an icon story. Yeah, so we made sure that this spam was targeting global styling. So let's put this in the icon wrapper so that it's not affecting the global styling. Oh yeah, and that's gone back to normal. So the spans aren't being affected by that anymore. Okay, documentation. Right, so now we've got this documentation page. Let's make sure that it's coming up first. So if you go to this component here, click Storybook, and you can see that intro is the first thing that pops up, and it's the first thing that it goes to when you go to the root. Yep, every time. So that's working perfectly. So we've sorted the order of our stories. Now let's add some content. So we want our intro to say a little bit about the project. So we'll go and add that now. Go to intro, close the others down. So we want this, instead of being a React fragment, we want this to be a div. Oops, want this to be a div. And what we want it to say is we want it to have the class of container. So it's Curious Byte Tutorial UI Kit. That's the title of this section. A little bit of info, or greatest UI kit on earth. Why not? Right, and let's add some different sections. So we'll say about the UI kit. We'll say this UI kit was built for the sole purpose of relieving all sufferers of headaches from socks and fairy lights. I think that's a reasonable intro. And we'll put our purpose as well, but we could get rid of that. We'll just keep it one-worded. Right, let's just grab some text from the World Through Program UI Kit. We'll just start to copy that now. And we'll put in the toolkit as well. So we've got about, purpose, toolkit. We're basically just copying the UI kit from the WFP. So we now have content. Let's make sure that this is styled. Let's go to documentation.sass. We'll add .container, and we'll make sure it's display block. We'll text align from the start. We'll have a max width of about 600 pixels, and we'll make sure it's centered. And all the H1s and the H2s, we want there to be a little bit of margin top. And we want the H1s to be body colored. And we want the paragraph elements to have a little bit of margin top. We'll say half spacing. Okay, right, that should be fine. Let's go take a look. So if we have a look at our UI kit, refresh that, and then go to the root, boom, we can see our styling has started to appear. One issue I can see is some of the colors haven't come through, so let's just go take a look at that. Aha! Right, let's make sure that we've added some color here. That's a little better. Let's add some styling for the H2. Let's do secondary. Okay, right, that's a lot better now. Yeah, so that's the basics of our intro. Let's go and try and set up an installation page now. So we just go to documentation, we'll go new file, and we'll go install.stories.tsx, and yeah, we'll do it in a similar vein. Make sure we've got our imports, make sure we're bringing in the styling from the documentation.sas. Let's make sure we set what the story name's going to be, and then let's actually add the story itself. So it's just going to keep it very simple. We're going to say we're installing the UI kit. Yep, just a little bit of information on installing our UI kit, and we're going to have a little code block here with just some pre-element tags. Right, let's go have a look to see how that looks. So as we can see here, if we refresh that, we've got our install showing up second here. We've got our install showing up first, so we actually need to set the order of that in the parameters. But we can see that it's showing up the code block, but there's no styling to it. So there is a bit of work we need to do to sort that out. But it does put it on separate lines. It kind of says what we want it to do. So let's just tidy all of this up. We'll sort the order out and the styling. So let's first go sort the styling out. So just go to documentation here and just add our styling. We want to have a dark background. Let's go a little darker. Make it. We'll have the color light green. Yeah, add some padding and spacing. Let's go take a look, and boom, there we go. So we now have our code blocks styled. You could actually make this a little bit better. The kind of go-to way of styling code blocks is essentially in the center here, you would wrap it in a code block within a pre-element. So you would end up with something like this. We now have our own terminal. You could add some more styling. You could add some icons here, but it should be fine for now. The next thing we want to sort out is the order of this. So intro is no longer the first place we go to. So let's go sort that out now. We'll need to go to our config file for Storybook. So we have the root section set up and their order, but to ever get around this and sort out an issue where, for example, we have one story showing up as the root instead of another, we can simply go here in the function load stories and just require it. So what we do is we require the intro, and that will be the first thing that shows up in the entire project. And then if we want, we can set the order. We can say install is the next one, which is there. Because this variable, this const, is only used in this function, we might as well use it and move it down. So now we've just tidied that all up. Okay, now let's go take a look. So this is what it looked like before. And then if we go to Storybook now, it should take us to intro. So we've got our roots showing. We know how to set the order if we ever need to. You can see the rest show without having to require them. But because we wanted to set the order in the documentation, we've set a require list. Now you could separate this out, so you could, for example, have a separate file. Let's go, so we've got a config here, and we could put something like documentation order.ts, and we could have these two in here, and we could say we require documentation order. And essentially what we're doing is we're requiring this file, this TypeScript file, which is requiring this order. So let's go check that out. So if I reload that, it still shows the intro. if we swap the install to be first and then go back and click Storybook, it swaps it around. And then we don't have to have all of these files within here, and we can just leave a comment to say documentation order list. And then people will know that is the order list document. Story order list actually makes more sense. So we've got our order all set up. There are a few last things we need to do. So to make this a design system truly, we need to give some guidelines on these components. So we'll start off with the button. So if we go to button now, and within button, we'll just take that button out, create a div, and we'll give it a class name of container. And what we'll say is for const require the button.sass file. Get rid of that. Right, let's go to the, in fact, we should probably have our own style sheet for this. Just so we can have some separate styling and not have to worry about it matching with that. Okay, so we've got the container file. Within here, we probably just want to maybe put the code in. We probably just want to say button, probably some information about the button, and then we have the button component here, so that's fine. We can have some information to show it with different icons, so we can have icon variation 1, icon variation 2, so we can have icon name, let's say IE. So we could, if we had set it up, we could have button variation 1, and then we could have button variation 2. So if we go to the button component, we can see that we've not got any props, we've not got any values, so we should probably change that now. And what we'll do is we'll create a completely reusable component to go here. So what we'll do is we'll turn button into a completely reusable component that you can use in the UI kit or elsewhere on the site. So let's go take a look at this now. So if you go to the button component, we can see that we've added some content. So one thing you have noticed is probably all of it in a primary color, and there's also no spacing. That's probably down to our reset style sheets. So let's go check those out and just maybe correct those a little bit. So let's go find out all the places where it's being used. So in installation success, it's saying all divs are going to have the color of primary. So what we can do now is installation success will just delete because we don't need it at this stage. So if we delete installation success, that should solve that problem now. So we now have all that default styling removed, which we didn't need. Refresh that. Brilliant. Okay, we still have no padding or margin on any of these, which isn't great, but we do want a certain level of default styling on headers because we do want them to be spaced out. So let's go back here. We're missing a single file, and that is a global file. I would go here and add a general styling file. I'll put this at the bottom here. And then if we go here, click a new file and click general.sass, and this will just have some general styling for the typography. Let's go to rules, just make sure that this is added. Right, so once we've added it here, it should be fine to our Webpack rules. And let's go check it out. Okay, so it looks like there's some parts of installation success still being required. Let's go check it out. Right, yeah, so that was being called in React. Let's just change that to hello world for now. So we now see the styling has been updated now for the entire project. We've just done a bit of tidying up, bit of housekeeping. Let's go to the button section. Yep, right, let's add that general styling. So we want all headers, paragraphs, just to have a little bit of margin. So we'll say half spacing for now. Just see how that looks. See if that's been brought in. Then we'll need to reset Storybook. Brilliant. So now we can see there's a bit of spacing, so it doesn't look totally clumped together. We should probably just change that to base spacing at this stage, which will mean it'll be 20 pixels, I believe. 20 pixels margin top. Yeah, we'll stick with that for now, because it gives us a decent bit of spacing. Okay. Right, so the next thing we want to do is create this code block. So we just want to create a code block component so we can put the code in each section and how we want to implement it. So let's go quickly create that. If you go to components and we create a new folder and we'll put code block. I will just leave it as that actually. And then we'll create a new file, index.tsx, codeblock.tsx, and we'll actually create a stories file for it as well. So let's start off here. Want it to be a React function component. It's a function component. Let's go get the code from the installation story, and then if we go to code block, put that in there, just delete this, make sure that's indented. This is where our content will go, and we just want to export that, and we just want to make sure that's exported here in the index. And then we'll just go grab a random story. Actually, it'd be more relevant if we got the installation story and we put it here. So it is components, and it is going to be code block. Will be default, and we'll put code block here. Get rid of this. Make sure this is imported in. You do not need that. Apparently the div has no closing tag. That doesn't have a closing tag. We haven't set any styling for this div yet. In fact, we'll make it a React fragment. Cool. Right, so that's all set up. Right, let's go have a look at the code block. Right, we're definitely going to need to add some styling for this. So let's add a style sheet. Let's close these others down. Let's add the styling. So if we go back to documentation.sass, just grab this, put it in here. What we'll do is we will rename this and give it a class. We'll give it a class name of css.codeblock. We'll just call it container because it will already add code block to it. And we'll add codeblock.sass as the required file. So now if we change this to CSS, so that should be container. Take that. We can get rid of that. Cool. Right, so that's all set up. Let's add some props. So I'll add an object here, and we will say we want class name. We want that to be a string. We want to add children, and we'll just set that to any for now. That'll be the children that go in here. But yeah, you could set that to like JSX, you could set that to HTML elements, you could set it to whatever you want it to be. You could even set it to a string, I guess, but we're just going to set it to any for now, and then you can decide what type or how strict you want to be with what you put in there. That's about everything. You could obviously do different styles. We could set two types of styles, so we could set a style So we could also set this as an enum, which basically means it's going to be several values like light and dark, for example. So we could have a light mode and a dark mode. So let's make sure we add this here. So just we connect this up. Don't think there's anything else that we'll need in terms of those props. Custom class name maybe, but that's probably about it. Put that in a string literal so we can add more values to that. Right, let's just destructure this a bit. So let's put in, because we don't need to be adding props dot whatever. Let's destructure this. So put in an object, and we want class name, children, and style equal to props. So that is now connected. We can choose a style here. So we can say CSS style. We'll say by default we'll set it to dark. Children, the default of that to nothing. Class name, we'll set the default to that to nothing. Make sure we add class name here as well. So that's if they want to add a custom class name. That'll be whether it's light or dark. So let's go here and just make sure we have a light and dark mode class. So if we have .light and dark, we obviously want this to go in the dark mode. We want that color to go there. And if we have a light mode, let's just copy and paste this, put this here. We probably want the text to be dark. So we'll put that there, and we'll choose a nice light color, probably like off-white or something like that. Let's go try that out. So if we go to stories code block, and we'll add some of these in. So if we add, yeah, we definitely want children. We don't really care too much about the style. We don't really care too much about that. So children is really the only one that we need to add. So put that last. We'll just put a string for now. npm install, we'll say put style, and we'll put light for now. And you can see the autocomplete there, which is really handy because it is an enum. It gives us the two options straight away. And we don't need to set a class name for now. So let's go take a look. So if we refresh that, we should see code block now. Go and have a look. So we can see the light mode showing up pretty well. Yeah, we might need to set a max width for this. So let's open that. Set a max width of 500 pixels. Let's go have a look. Yeah, it's not too bad. Keep in mind in Storybook, we always try to avoid adding any padding or margin to the stories for the component, just so it kind of shows you how it would look in the wild. So this would be the component itself, and it's stuck right up against the left because we don't want it to ship with marginal padding. You can add it to your story, but it would be a bit disingenuous as to how it would look in an app. So yeah, let's change the styling now. So if we go to the stories and change that to doc mode, and there we go, we can change the stylings. Now let's add this code block to other parts of the site. Where did we last use it? We used it in the installation section, didn't we? So if we take this and we just replace this with code block style, we don't need to set style because it defaults to dark. Let's add, we'll add the children. So with the code block, we want to add the children. So we'll do it through a string literal. So we'll go here. Actually, let's do that. So we want to say npm install, and then we want to do a new line, and then we'll say npm run storybook. Right, that should be fine. Oh, that should be fine. Let's go check it out. Let's bring that over. Refresh. Go to documentation, install. So if you go to the Storybook page, that's working brilliantly now. If we go to code block, we've got that. So we can now start adding code blocks to all of our components to say this is what the code will be. So for example, if we go to code block here, let's just change that a little bit. So we don't want it to say npm install. We actually want it to show what it would look like. So in fact, we can just copy this and put it in here. Change this to quotes actually. And we want the children to show npm install and then class name equals any class. Right, let's go have a look. So one of the issues we can see here is the code block just basically wraps. It doesn't actually increase in size because we've set a max width to it. So we can fix that. We'll remove the max width so it can go to any size. Let's just change that. Go to code block, just remove this. Probably double the padding on this. So we can see now that that basically tells you what the code block is, some of the props, and then you can go into more detail, make a props table and just talk about it there. We basically have started to build our design system. We've started to talk about the code that we're using and display some of the code. This is the level that we want to achieve. So if we look at buttons, for example, they've got their entire props table here, specified what they would need it for, the variations. This is something that you want to aim to go to. Then obviously adding some formatting to your code block, which you can do later on as you improve your code block component over time. Or you could just bring in an add-on that does that for you and it sits in your own component. All the different versions of your buttons you can add. So yeah, the scope for improving is really large, and the documentation, the design system that you add, that you start talking about different variations, adding little quality of life features like code blocks to improve the aesthetics of your design system, it all helps. And obviously having a documentation section, get people up to speed with your UI kit, what they need to know, is really handy. So I think in terms of documentation, in terms of looking into design systems, that's a good starting point for you to get stuck into. Again, I encourage you to go look at UI kits out there. So we've looked at the World Food Programme one a lot. Definitely check out the Airbnb one as well. I'll leave the links for these again in the description, but that's been documentation and design systems. In the next video, we'll be looking at creating reusable components and how they can be useful in your UI kit. So that'll be a part of the next video. If you are new to this channel or you found this video helpful, please do make sure to like and subscribe. I've been Harry, and this has been Curious Byte.